Nikki Powley asks, do you have any advice for training and racing as the weather gets warmer? I'm very used to the northeast weather and have no problems being out in the drizzle and cold over winter. I know it's not warm for most, but once it hits 16 degrees plus and is humid, I find my heart rate and perceived effort is higher on easy runs, and I struggle in races. The nutrition plan that works for me over winter just doesn't happen, as I usually feel more nauseated on long runs in the summer. I know I need to adapt, but end up running mostly early or later in the day due to work, and then race day, the heat gets to me. Any tips? And along the same lines, we've got a question from Steve Felby, who says, would be interesting to know about heat in the summer. As each summer the UK seems to be getting hotter, being a Hong Kong-based runner who pops over to Blythe, the mighty Blythe, a couple of times a year, I find it interesting the different approaches. Here we have to deal with 30 to 35 degrees with 100% humidity, and he says that he often goes out for a run and even when doing a short session, comes home like he's just come out of the shower, nice, and quite often loses anything from 3 to 5 kgs in weight, even though he tries to put in at least 1 litre of fluid an hour. So we've kind of mixed those two questions together, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to train for the heat first, and then we're going to call on our resident medic to then what to do in the heat, how to react to the heat, and how to stay safe. Trish, let's start with you. What sort of things do you advise your clients to do if they're looking to either race in the heat or really now, just even in the summer?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of training in the heat, in the military environment and also in a running environment as well. So I lived in Cyprus for 2 years and would train, in the summer. It would be exceptionally hot. In terms of my background, I'm quite kind of clued up in terms of training for it. What I would say for clients is the reality is training in the summer in hot conditions is going to be very, very different, and you can't have the same perceptions of what it's going to be. It will be different. So you need to change your mindset in terms of what that looks like. For training in hot weather, you've got to be taking on a lot more fluid, and it's all tied in with your effort level. So if you're the type of session that you're doing is going to determine how quickly you're burning through that water, and you need to build up to that gradually. So I would say what I say to my clients is to try, let's say you're doing a normal, let's say 20-mile route, ideally you want to kind of loop that so that you're coming back. Ideally, maybe that might be 5 miles for you. For me, that could be 10 miles, or if I'm not taking X amount of water. So you've got to almost have a get out of jail card for part of the route, so that if it's not going your way, you know you're going to be able to hit water at certain locations. So in terms of training, you've got to change your routes potentially. In terms of pace, you've really got to look at your pace. Look at what you're trying to achieve out of that session. So if it's a zone 2 session that you're trying to like an easy run, your perceived effort is key. I know a lot of people will try and go on a pacing plan to set times, and I would say forget that. Forget your set times. Trust your body, trust how you feel. Go in terms of your breathing and how your body is responding. For longer runs, I would say you've got to stay in that zone 2 bracket, and particularly for races. With running in hot weather, running hard, you're going to get much less time out of that than you would do in a winter session. So let's say if I was going to go and run a tempo session, I might be able to sustain that in the winter for X amount of time. The reality is in the summer, it's probably going to be less before you reach that critical point where your body isn't going to be able to sustain that, and your body will increase very, very quickly then in temperature. And once you hit that point, that critical point, there's no going back from that. So you've got to make sure you stay in that zone, that appropriate zone for you for that heat training. It might be much, much slower than you're used to, but that's what you've got to do. Making sure you've got the right kit, so making sure you've got your sun cream on, making sure you've got your hat on. If it's a long hat, that's going to cover the back of your neck. Little things like that are going to make a difference. A lot of people like to wear vests, whatever works for you. I tend to say try and wear a t-shirt, because actually that sun exposure on your skin, even if you're wearing sun cream, it does make a big difference. So if you can wear a t-shirt, a lot of people will try and wear vests. If you can wear a t-shirt, For the longer days, again, that's what I would recommend, but it's personal preference in regards to that. In regards to training as well, what I generally say is try and train in the mornings or the evenings where it's generally cooler. If you can't do that, you've then got to try and look at getting in a gym, getting on the treadmill, but particularly with your harder sessions, you want to be doing your harder sessions either in those cooler periods in the morning or in the evening, or again, doing your hard sessions in the gym on the treadmill. You've also got to look at in terms of how your build up is for the week. So when I was training in hot weather, I would try and do my easy sessions out in the day. So I'd start adapting to that heat. My body would be adapting to going out and working in that heat. I would start that adaptation and it wouldn't feel so bad. But my hard sessions would be done in cooler environments, so in the morning or in the gym. And there's another reason why you should do that. It's because as you build up during the week, it's progressively taking its toll. So if you're going to do all of your sessions outside, you're giving a lot more from your body than what you would do, in terms of, just saying like how much water you're going to lose, how much electrolytes you're going to lose, etc. So if you can split that into gym work and outside work, that will enable you to be able to push for longer and sustain higher mileage, higher efforts during the week. So that would be my advice in terms of training in hot weather. But the bottom line is you've got to go out there and you've got to do it and you've got to adapt and you've got to experiment with it. But you've got to do that in a controlled environment. So having a loop, like I said, is a really good way to do that, because then for example, how much water you're taking at a certain effort, at a certain temperature over a certain distance. So that's a really good way to understand how your body is going to perform on race day.
So Trish, you mentioned about heart rate and RPE. That I find the problem with when you're running in the heat is that I think actually if you've got access to a heart rate monitor, it's a really good idea to wear it, because you can think I'm running really easy, but actually that heart rate zone 2 is actually at the top of heart rate zone 2 and very quickly goes to zone 3 as soon as there's a little incline or you're running a bit, you're suddenly in a bit of a hotter, more exposed place. So perhaps if you've got access to a heart rate monitor, and this is when it's a good idea to train quite a bit with the heart rate, because you get to know what your easy heart rate is. And often I say don't be a slave to that heart rate, but actually this might be a case where actually, especially in the first, if you're doing a long run in the heat, is to spend the first 90 minutes right at the bottom of that zone 2 and keeping it so you can get the fluids in. And then as the sort of cardiac drift starts and you start getting hotter and hotter, you've been at the bottom, so you've got somewhere to go, rather than if you start at the top end of your zone 2, which should feel super easy anyway, you've got nowhere to go and it quickly dips then into zone 3.
And again, I think it's what works best for the individual. I tend to think 100% always go with feel. Like I never look at my heart rate.
My thought was more like teaching people how that feels in relation to that. If you're not sure, get your heart rate monitor on and see if it reacts to like how you're feeling, because I think that's where lots of people go wrong in the heat, especially at the start of a long race or run. They think they're going easy, and then especially
I mean, for me, it's I always say do the breathing test. Like if you can breathe through your nose, then if you can't breathe through your nose, you're going too hard. But again, that's not for everyone. So I mean, whatever works for you as an individual. So if it's your heart rate in terms of helping you get used to that feel, that's great. Again, just do whatever works for you. But the bottom line is you've got to be in that easy bracket and then build from there once you've got an understanding of how your body's responding and what your body needs at each time.
I love the idea of doing hard sessions if you can inside or in the early parts of the days or in the evening, and then just doing recovery and easy runs outside. Russell, Dragon's Back champion, how have you coped with the heat, and what's your sort of advice of training to run in the heat?
I've been lucky enough to have been running for 30 years now, and I've had to come up against heat problems a lot. Experience that springs to mind is London Marathon 2018. It was the hottest marathon on record, and the problem was not the heat. It was 24 degrees. That's hot for a marathon. With the tarmac as well, it seems to radiate more heat. But the problem was that winter we'd had the beast from the east, So we'd all been doing our long runs in like -2 or like blizzards, and especially in North Wales, we were getting really hot. So nobody got any heat acclimatation at all. And then we got thrown into, it was literally that weekend, the temperature just went up 20 degrees. There was a lot of ambulances, there were a lot of problems, there were a lot of people just running through. And yeah, I have to say, it was mainly guys who are having those problems, just refusing to back off the pace. I was in great shape. I wanted to run a PB. I just was like, I'm going to ignore this and bulldoze through. And I hit some kind of a massive wall and ended up just traipsing home like a sorry mess because I didn't listen to my body. Yeah, really agree with what Trish says. You know, heart rate is great in terms of training and you can use it and it's a great starting place. I often do feel like you should try and phase off it to be able to feel for yourself, but it's a great opportunity to understand initially what zone 2 is.
Yeah.
But in a race, your heart rate is just all over the place anyway, because you've got adrenaline, you've got caffeine, you've got the heat, you've got all sorts of crazy stuff going on. And so it really wasn't helping me. And I would, say first thing is, just acclimatizing and understanding how important that is. And I didn't. And I've had lots of instances since where I've gone out too hard in the heat, not respected it, and not listened to my body and not understood the implications of that, and then just come down so hard like a ton of bricks. So I don't do that anymore. I've got a lot better at listening. And there are like RPE messages that get sent to your body, but I find with heat, they get scrambled and it's a different kind of problem. You don't always feel like you're overheating. Like weird stuff goes on. Sometimes I feel cold.
Yeah.
Just understanding, like that. I think of it like I'm in a cockpit and all the dials are just spinning around and you don't know what's going on anymore. Do you know what I mean? Do you get that? So I'm like, okay, when that's happening. So actually, this Saturday we had a race called Welsh Castles Relays, and it was 26, 27 degrees. A lot of people collapsing and ending up in ambulances. I ran it last year, and I ran it. It was a half marathon. I ran it 5 minutes faster. And it was a big ego hit for me to have to run this race 5 minutes slower. But I was like, I'm going to end up in an ambulance if I don't slow down. And I was lucky enough to have seen those signs before, like, oh yeah, this is what's happening. So for me, like Trish says, a lot of it is breathing. I have a breathing pattern that I stick to, and it's tied to my steps: 2 steps in, 2 steps out. I breathe in, 2 out, 2. And if I can't do that anymore in a race environment, I'm like, okay, I'm out of control here, and I need to slow down, and I need to take my pace down from 5 minute 20 miling to 6 minute miling until I could feel comfortable. I had to slow it right down, and that it's just accepting that the heat can do that to you, and it's better to get through the race and finish. Your pace is going to suffer. It's just not optimal for humans to run at full pace, full performance in the heat. It's just accepting that quickly. So there's a guy, Callum Hawkins. I would definitely recommend looking him up. He's a Scottish marathon runner. So Scotland, obviously, they're not bred, and they're not like Kenyans. They don't deal with the heat very often. And he went and did Gold Coast Marathon in Australia, super hot, and he went out at pace, tried to do the stubborn machine, and he ended up in a heap on the floor. It was really dangerous. He got carried off in the hospital. He was winning the race when he collapsed. And he learned a lot from that. And actually a lot of science has come out about that exposure to heat. So he would spend time in a sauna, and he would actually spend time like training on a treadmill with full kit on, and even have like heaters in his garage. And like Trish said, and you, Eddie, just lots of zone 2 work. And he came fourth in the Doha Marathon, which was just as hot. And
that is hot.
Absolutely, he did incredible just from lots and lots of exposure to that what's it called, that climatic strain or something like that.
Yeah.
Really,
I think one of the problems lots of people listening will be thinking the problem is we don't have that regular heat in which we can acclimatize all the time, and we don't want to have so what can we do when the heat suddenly strikes and we're not acclimatized? And I think we're all pulling out the biggest thing that you have to do is slow down. It all becomes about a finish over pace. You almost want to turn everything off, slow down, and just manage yourself. And the slowest people, this is when, if you are normally a happy back of the pack runner and that's where your place is, you are going to thrive in this because you know you are comfortable at that pace and you are going to just keep on running that. So I think, yeah, the biggest thing, we're not going to be as heat acclimatized as we would like to be, is to start off slower and just be prepared that you're going to get slower, and that day is going to be about a finish over a time. And sometimes that's really how we see, like, yeah, half the field won't be able to do that, and it might not be. It might also be, don't be afraid to go, do you know what, I'm not ready to race in the heat, so I'm not going to run in this heat. We don't have to be heroes. So if you think, you know, I've not run in 30 degrees, or I do not do well in the heat, I know I don't do well in the heat, there's nothing, it's almost a braver decision to go, do you know, I'm not actually going to run that race because it's hot. I'm not going to enjoy it to start off with, and I'm not ready, and I don't think I need to. I'm going to live to fight another day. So let's move on to nutrition. What we can do in the heat. How would we change our nutrition plans?
Just real quick, Dragon's Back, days 1 to 3, really hot. Luckily enough, I'd read a study on how carbohydrates binds to H2O, and if you can get some sugars into your drinks, and obviously the electrolytes, get some energy drinks, and it seems to be a more complete way to hydrate, where the water can pass straight through. Obviously, Becky will understand this way better than I do, but I felt that really did help. Where if I actually just put something in my drink, I felt like I was hydrating better. That was a really quick one that anyone can do quite easily, and that really helped me a lot.
Matching that pace to the nutrition is absolutely key. Like we started off talking about slowing down. If you haven't slowed down, you're then not going to be able to get your nutrition in, and that's when the dials are going to start the spinning. And so slowing down will help the gut absorb that nutrition as well. And like you said, I think during the hottest parts of the day, changing your fueling to what it might be for the first couple of hours, maybe looking at eating solids if your race starts at 5 a.m, 6 a.m, preloading with some solids, where perhaps you might start more on gels and then move to solids, being really flexible with your plan, so that you might go, actually, I'm gonna while it's cooler, I'm gonna actually try and get my nutrition on with a bit more solids, and then I'm going to move to fluids during the day when the tummy's going to go, I just want to lie down, and then when it starts getting cooler. So being quite flexible and having lots of different options in your plan, but definitely being prepared and having a nutrition drink that you can stomach, which has got electrolytes, or you've got salt taps with you and has got energy in as well. This is when I think planning and experimenting with different nutrition is key to success in a hot rate. And you guys have got no excuses, because we've got 1,100 discount codes for every single person that makes nutrition over on Patreon, so you can experiment. Trish, what are your ideas for nutrition in the blazing sun?
So from experience, I mean, in terms of my own running and from what I've seen with other people, it's quite difficult for people to eat in the heat and run. So I always, from myself personally, I try and go with stuff that's very, very easy to get down. So again, that's carbohydrates in your drinks, and which I think is an absolute win. You know, it's in terms of when your body is working in heat, it is working so hard. Everything is strained. The stress on the body from heat is something that you just don't account for. So anything you can do to help the gut, you know, get that energy in as efficiently as possible is a massive win. So personally, I'm all for drinks. I use that, and gels. And you know, me personally, I use Fellow Fort chews because they're quite easy and I don't have to chew them. It's really hard to chew.
Just to the Velo Forte chews, having just done a race in the heat, if you chop them up into so you've got the square, and then you chop the square into 4. You don't even need to, because I was finding
pop them like pills.
You can pop them like a pill, and then you can chug them with a Tailwind Chaser.
Tailwind Chaser.
You know, when you get so hot, then chewing becomes you end up at the back of your mouth for 3 hours. There's still that chew. So if you know that it's going to be hot, try just snipping them up into little kisses, you can call them. And,
Eddie's Villefort kisses. I'll remember that.
I'll share those out. I'm not ashamed. I'm not shy. Yes, sorry, Trish. Yes, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen guys on races before with like, some proper solid food there and just choking on that food because they haven't got the saliva to to chew and get that food down, and that becomes a massive effort. So I would say just stick with
super simple carbs.
And again, doing that, when you're training for heat, doing that training loop of every 5 miles. I mean, 5 miles is a good one because you can really look at, or if you're working Ks, let's say 10K, for example, just doing that loop, what you've had on that 10K loop,
it's also a really good distance, isn't it? Because most checkpoints are going to be roughly an hour to 2 hours, an hour and a half, maybe.
Yeah, see, I'm all over this. Not my first rodeo. It's just, it balances really, really well in terms of for training. So yeah, definitely reduce you will have to change your nutrition. Like for example, when I was training for winter stuff, I want much more solid food. Like when I get into a checkpoint, I want a proper meal, like a proper, heartwarming.
Heartwarming. Now I'm looking for something heartwarming in this.
I want something heartwarming, like just get it down. I want my casseroles or my stews.
Yeah, I mean, like if you compare your spine nutrition pack to your Dragon's Back day 2, like they're going to be totally different, aren't they?
Massively different. And when you're running, it's so much harder in hot weather to digest that food. So I'm 100% for minimizing chewing and just getting it down in the most efficient way with your nutrition.
Rebecca, let's bring you in. Where's the science on this nutrition? Are we right? Are we making sense with our Villefort kisses? And
I think it makes complete sense, doesn't it? I think so much of this will be physiological, but also mental as well. It is just that ability to chew, lack of saliva, all of those things are sort of physical and mental, aren't they? So however you can get calories in the easiest format is gonna pay dividends, isn't it? I think obviously we can talk a little bit about hydration separately, but certainly hydration in the heat even more important than it is normally. But there's some important things to say about it as well. You can't really cheat heat illness by being overhydrated, and you can actually run into more issues, and you can't sort of overhydrate either. So even if you go in and you think, I'll just drink extra before the race and it'll last, it doesn't work like that.
Like a camel.
Yeah, exactly. So those are sort of common mistakes people will make, that if they just drink a bit more, they can carry on a bit more. It doesn't necessarily help. It obviously helps us with our sweating and our ability to sweat and dissipate heat, but you can't sort of get your way around it. But certainly liquid calories, I think, are really important, but it's just having an eye on just how much you are drinking, and wanting to avoid overhydration and hyponatremia, because obviously you're losing salt as well. So combined sort of glucose, electrolytes, as well as the water.
Planning as well, like planning to if you are doing an ultra, like a mountain ultra, where you haven't got access to fluid, you've got an hour and a half to 2 hours between a checkpoint, so you've got to go into that checkpoint, sort yourself out, take your time, rehydrate, but then also plan. I would definitely say anything above like 20 degrees, really, you want to take an extra bottle, even if the mandatory ticket's only a litre. You take what I was doing on Saturday was I was filling up, making sure my bottles were, obviously they were like strained dry by the time I got into the checkpoint. The nipple had been sucked off, but then I was filling those up, but then I was taking another bottle, and I would work through the bottle I was holding first. So I sort of like trying to take like half an hour for each bottle. The temptation is to guzzle it as well, but in the heat, you have got to try and be like, you suddenly feel, you get really hot, you're like, just drink, and being really steady and trying to make those bottles last. Because also the last thing you want to do is get to your 3 miles from the checkpoint and you've got no fluid. So trying to get to that place where you're sipping and it's just a constant drip rather than guzzling half a bottle because you suddenly feel really thirsty. So treating yourself like a toddler in the ultra, of like just sipping, taking your time rather than then downing a bottle and having so much fluid to then absorb as well. Rebecca, what's your take on fruit? Because I wanted a lot of fruit in the heat, but I don't think that came up very quickly when I tried, because it's quite acidic, isn't it?
It is, but I think the best thing, I did the Devil of the Highlands race when it was one of the hottest races they'd ever had in 2019, and that bit of watermelon a few miles from the end was just that was that heartwarming nice. in the opposite, in the mental sense, not warming. But yeah, so I think again it really comes down to what you can stomach, and some fruits are going to be a bit acidic and are probably going to be upset your stomach a little bit, but I think if there's ones that you can stomach normally and you want, then again that's anything you can get in calorie wise is going to be positive. So I don't think necessarily avoid it for a sort of physical reason, as long as you know it doesn't sort of, like orange juice for example, that's really acidic, isn't it? So I wouldn't do citrus, I wouldn't do that sort of thing. But I would say things like watermelon, apples, anything that you really fancy that have got some liquid to it, you can just chew them again easier. So there's no problem with saliva if you're having a bit of watermelon or other types of melon or whatever. Sort of those sort of wetter fruits are going to help, aren't they? So I wouldn't say there's a reason to avoid it unless you know you're particularly prone to sort of acidy, indigestion from that sort of thing.
You can always try. Your stomach will soon tell you, won't it, if you don't want something. Shall we move on now, Rebecca? I know you've got some top tips for us of actually coping with the heat, what's happening to our body in the heat, what we can do, what are the signs that we can look for? Because us as ultra runners, we've all done it. We will push ourselves to collapse, basically, when we see it out every weekend at different races. So what are the sort of, maybe should we start with the symptoms that we should be looking for?
What we've got to understand that when we get overheated, it's our brain that's going to be suffering. So our brain, our homeostasis for the human body is really reliant on quite a narrow bandwidth of temperature. It doesn't like to be too hot, doesn't like to be too cold, so it's a narrow bandwidth. And when you start to stray outside of that either end, you're going to run into problems, and you're going to run into problems mentally. And with heat stroke, particularly, heat stroke is where your body temperature goes above a certain level. We normally say 40 degrees, and you've got some attendant symptoms, usually to do with your brain. So you feel dizzy, or you feel confused, or speech is affected, all of those sorts of things. And then, so that's pretty clear cut when people get to that sort of level. So when they've got definite exertional heat stroke, then it's usually quite clear that they're unwell. And we've taught, other people have mentioned symptoms already, things to do with they're not able to sweat anymore, or they feel cold, paradoxically. And that's because our brain can no longer make sense of those messages that we're getting. So it's telling us we feel cold when we actually are very hot. And the converse happens when you've got hypothermia. Some people start to take clothes off when they're hypothermic because they feel too hot. So all those messages absolutely are, the dials in the cockpit absolutely are whirring. It's not giving us the correct information. So we can't act on it because our body's not telling us the right thing. So it's pretty clear cut when it gets to that level. But then more of what we see is sort of heat exhaustion, which is the next level down, where people have got some symptoms and they are overheated. So again, their body temperature has sort of gone above that nice parameter that we like to work within. And that's when you start to feel more sort of a bit sick, dizzy, lethargic, weak, fatigue, all those sorts of things. All of the symptoms that you can normally get in an ultramarathon anyway. So that's the difficulty, is working out what is due to heat, and therefore what is putting you at risk of going into the previous category of heat exhaustion, exertional heat stroke, and what is just exhaustion because of a bit of heat, but also because you're in the middle of an ultra. And it's that bit that I think you can work on, and that's where you've got an intervention point. When someone goes so far to the point that they've into exertional heat stroke, it's sort of too far gone to be able to rectify that. They just need to stop, and they need some active cooling and intervention. But most of what we're going to see are people who are a little bit overheated, and we can hopefully intervene with that. But by far and away, the biggest thing that we can do is slow down, or stop in the shade, and stop and cool down, because our body is producing heat. That's the problem. So yes, the sun is on us, but actually it's the fact that we're working and producing heat is causing the problem. Okay,
you feel like you're internally exploding from the inside out.
Exactly.
Don't you? You feel like your whole this is also raw for me, your whole skin is on fire. You feel like like in a cartoon, a ball of flames just slowly moving along, very slowly moving along a trail.
Exactly. So unfortunately, yes, it's heat production is the issue, and therefore needing to slow down and stop. And as I say, what can we do in that situation? Essentially, pace is the absolute key thing. And from what we know about people who end up in extremis, it's the people who push through those symptoms, push through those early warning signs, and carry on producing that heat, and then just can't cool down without active help. And obviously, Trish's experience in the military. Obviously, I work in the military as well, and so we've got lots of relatively recent examples of where this has come badly wrong, and it's very much that sort of mindset of I'm going to carry on, and that's the biggest enemy here, really, is that thinking I'll just drink something, I'll just eat something and I'll be okay. It's not quite as simple as that. That sort of mentality of wanting to continue at all costs is what eventually will undo people, because you just continue to produce that heat. So recognition, slowing your pace down, stopping, having a rest in the shade, trying to cool down, that sort of thing.
Would there be a space at checkpoints to take people's temperature? Would that be a point? Because often I would have been going on Saturday, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. And probably if you took my temperature, Rebecca would have been like, get in there. You're out of here, Eddie.
So we've got West Highland Way coming up. It depends when this recording goes out, but we've got West Highland Way coming up this weekend, and it is likely to be hot. And in Scotland, we don't often encounter heat to the level where it has much of an impact. But certainly we are looking at exactly that sort of plan, because checking someone's temperature, it's an objective measure. This is what your body temperature currently is. Therefore, we need to make some interventions to try and bring that down a little bit. And it's not always the case that if you're hot, you're definitely going to have an issue, but, you know, some people can tolerate it a little bit better than others. But it's an objective marker to say your body is starting to go to the absolute top limit of what it can sustain. And that's sort of 39.5, that sort of temperature. Exactly the same thing happens in children, for example, when they're babies and they have febrile convulsions. That's when their temperature's gone above that level that they can sustain. So temperature does give us that early warning sign. And I would say all races should have access to be able to check people's temperatures when they're putting on races in the summer, because it's an easy thing that you can do, and it's an easy thing that you can then persuade somebody that they do need to stop.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Temperature's 40.1. You know, if you're a toddler, you'd be about to have a febrile convulsion. Now you're at a heat stroke. So let's sort of, step things.
And it's a
back.
life-saving tool. Like it's life-saving, like ultimately as well. You know, that's it's a very easy thing to do to make a huge difference, isn't it?
Yeah, it takes 2 seconds, stick it in your ear, and it's you know that's a good.
Glad you said stick it in your ear, because that was my next question. I was going to be like, how can you take a mouth one oral, or do we need to go
just in the
Trish
ear?
Wouldn't mind, she'd be straight in there. Come on, let's get this done.
And the ear is quite close to the brain, so it gives you an idea of what's going on inside your body. But yes, when we're talking about studies and core temperatures and things like that, they use rectal thermometers. We don't put those into races. Like, that's not going to be accessible to any medical team, really, in most races.
It might be. Would it be useful if you're training for the heat and you're going to do a long run to check your temperature? Maybe like if you're doing like laps, like Trish said, and you said you start to feel hot, to sort of see what happens to your temperature.
I think it would be really helpful if anyone's got. Most people with kids have got some type of thermometer device. Okay, yeah.
And then you go, you can go to school. Thank God.
It used to. We all got them in COVID because it was like, do I need to do a COVID test? No, it's 37.9. I don't need to do one. So yeah. So if you've got one of those at home, stick it in your kit, put in your crew kit, and someone can just check. Even if you're checking it yourself as part of the race, it can just be a sign to say, actually, I do need to go and discuss that with the first aid at that checkpoint.
I think that's a really good
idea. I don't like to give people more things to obsess about, but because that's never healthy, but it's probably a useful thing just to stick in your car.
And as runners, we're not going to do it ourselves because it would mean someone was going to tell us to stop. But as a crew member, when if you start to think you might, that they're not looking right, or just to reassure yourself, that we're managing the heat, we're keeping our runner cool.
There can be benefits, and personally, I find that really helpful. Like when it really sucks and it feels horrible, heat training, if you do it right and you're really careful and you train in zones 1 and 2 and you hydrate properly, humans tend to be able to respond to that and improve and adapt. And so just personally, just changing it around in my head from it being a negative, horrible thing to, well, if I get out of here and it cools down, or we're in a heat wave in the UK and it cools down, there can be benefits that you carry from that heat training. Certainly in terms of altitude, you can get non-responders, but generally it seems that humans are better at responding to heat, and they have adaptations that can take place. And I think it's something to do with plasma in the blood. So just framing it in that way, if you have to train in the heat because of work or lifestyle.
Yeah, we've rather framed it in a doom and gloom, haven't we?
Yeah, well, there can be benefits. I mean, probably,
and we do adapt quite quickly, don't we?
Yeah, quicker than altitude can take 3 weeks.
3 to 5 days, is it, Rebecca, that you can start heat adaptation?
The sort of wilderness medical guidelines, they're suggesting no less than 8 days, and if you can heat train for sort of 10 to 14, that's probably the best, and it's sort of 1 to 2 hours a day.
3 for us guys then, and then 8 days for
but that means just over a week you can bring about some improvement, and then that improvement does last a period of time. Conversely, if you have a significant heat illness, your susceptibility then lasts as well. So trying to avoid getting into that situation is important, and it's something we might need to talk about later. But yes, so you can certainly train and you keep the adaptation for a period. But if you tip into problems, then your susceptibility remains for a period, but then it should go back to its normal baseline.
Oh, okay.
But there is some evidence to say that. So if you had one race that went badly for heat, you probably wouldn't want to be doing another one in the heat in the very soon afterwards.
Okay, not forever. I was like, oh no, I'll never be able to run in the heat again.
And also, it's then looking back into see if you had any inherent susceptibilities as well. There are some medications people take. There's certain things that make more susceptible in the first place as well. So you'd want to look at all of that if you ended up with issues. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about.
Can I just say? I'll just say 2 things in terms. We're going on and on.
No, you've got everyone's got such good stuff. Keep it coming. I love it.
Just in terms of some top tips from experience of symptoms that people can see and recognize. So my two top tips in terms of recognizing symptoms are generally when people are tipping over that edge. Sometimes their hearing will go, and it'll go quite sort of blocked hearing, and sometimes you get like a ringing as well. So it feels like your ears are blocked and it's like a ringing, and that can be a good indicator from what I've seen of people before. The number one thing though, I think you start to see, and you can see that when people are getting to that point, is that their skin starts to go grey. And I've seen this in everyone I've ever seen who's suffered in terms of dehydration or heat illness. Their skin has gone grey, and they get very, very clammy. So clammy grey skin, and those are 2 things that you can see and talk and get from a person straight away if you're starting to. Or even yourself if you're starting to be unsure about heat illness. Those are 2
Can we
things.
call this 2 top tips? Can we do that? Can we have that?
Trish's 2 top tips. Just put that out. That's the podcast for the week. Done. That is great advice. How do we, Rebecca? What would you say? What can we do to cool ourselves down if we feel ourselves starting to tip? Where where are the places on our body that are the great receptors to cool down? What sort of things can we do when we get to checkpoints to cool down?
So at a checkpoint, if you can find some shade, clearly just getting out of the sun, that's first and foremost, get out of the heat source if you can. So that's the easiest thing to do. And then if you've got access to cold water or ice, that sort of thing, putting it in areas where you've got big blood flow, so big blood vessels. So when we're actively trying to cool people down, we will be looking at things like armpits, groin, and things around your neck and that sort of thing. People do have a tendency to sort of tip water over the top of their head. It might make you feel a bit better, but it's probably not going to actively cool you for very long. So we sort of target the major vessel points, because what you want to do is cool the blood as it circulates and as it returns to the body. So those are the areas that we would normally suggest, but anything you can do to sort of aid that evaporation. So wetting your clothing, wetting your hair, they do help. And also then if you're again sat in the shade, if you've got an amenable crew member, they could lightly fan you with a towel or a palm leaf, like so Cleopatra type style. So things like that, any sort of airflow. So airflow combined with water, it leads to evaporation. That water leads to cooling. So it's the combination of those 2 things. But certainly just getting out of the heat and sort of wetting things if you're really
Would you
dry.
say cover the skin? So running in a vest is a bad idea. Be better to run in a long sleeve.
You want to avoid getting sunburn first and foremost. So if you require to cover up to avoid sunburn, then cover up, definitely. I personally don't like to have like my shoulders exposed, so I tend not to run in vests because I just feel like that makes me feel quite hot.
It's
so
such
I
a
tend
big surface area too.
it is,
isn't it?
and all this sort of area is all then exposed. So I would say yes, tend to cover up, primarily to avoid sunburn, because that will be a definite enemy that prevents sweating. And if you're going into a multi-day event, for example, if you've got really bad sunburn on day one, that's going to be a nightmare from a heat illness perspective, let alone just the pain perspective. So because that skin, there is evidence to say once you sunburn, that again, you just don't sweat as effectively. So prevention of sunburn is important, certainly for multi-day events. I would say cover up. You can always arm sleeves, people can roll them up, roll them down, people put ice in arm sleeves, all those sorts of things as well will hopefully subjectively make you feel cooler, and objectively sort of avoid that sunburn. Yeah.
I think as well in the heat, if you feel like you're actively managing it, you sort of twist the dial a little bit back to, I'm back in a little bit of control, I'm cooling myself down. It's sort of like keeping the brain reassured that you're still functioning. And I think as well, if you're crewing someone as well, if you see your runner actually trying to cool themselves down and going through their process in the checkpoint, you know that, okay, it's when they're sort of like not, and those sort of processes start getting missed, that you know, okay, we need to. But I never thought about actually the groin and the armpits. I was always a back of the neck cooling person, but actually that's another good tip if you're going to take some time at the checkpoint. Whack some ice on the old.
That's it. Yeah, big areas where there's big blood vessels. So yeah.
Thank you guys so much for all your heat tips. That's amazing. Hope that's helpful. And if you've got any more comments or questions, fire them away to us. I don't think there's much more we could talk about in that subject, but there'll always be something, and there'll always be learning, always improving. But I think the biggest thing to pull away is to slow down, take your time and enjoy the scenery rather than letting it flash by if it's a hot day, and stop for an ice cream.